Hey guys, I've been slicking up my custom Crosman 2240 pellet gun here, and I want to show you how you can slick up the internals here inside the grip frame and tune it up so that you can get a truly lovely trigger pull that has no grittiness, no play, and is just smooth as silk. Nice let off there. I'm going to show you how that's done at no cost. You can do it yourselves. Okay, I'm going to work on improving the trigger feel on this. And this spring right here is pretty stiff. And I'm going to show you a super easy way to lighten the trigger pull on this. Basically, you take the spring out, which is easy enough, right? And you over compress it. If you've got strong fingers, just squeeze it in with your fingers until it's all the way squeezed in. And what that does is that over compresses the spring and straighten it out a little bit, and it'll be looser when it goes in. Let's see if I can do this one-handed. See how my dexterity is today. Okay, so now the spring is in there, and it's looser than it was before. You can feel it's not rattling. You don't want it to be rattling, but you give it a good over tension like that. That's about the quickest free trigger mod you can come up with right there. You don't have to hardly do any work at all. Take the grip panel off, pull the spring out, over squeeze it, and now you'll find that you have a much lighter trigger, much lighter. And what you can do to test the gun when it's unloaded like this is the only thing that would make that jump out is a good hard whack. Drop that gun on something that's not going to hurt the gun. Can you make it fire? No. And it hasn't altered it to the point where it's bad, but you have a much lighter trigger pull. So there's your free 2-second trigger mod for the Crosman 2240. And I'm going to show you some other things you can do that are a little more intense. Okay, if you've never taken your Crosman 2240 apart and you're holding it like this and you've just taken the 2 screws off to take the frame off, you are about to lose 2 extremely small parts that you need. There's a tiny spring and a tiny ball bearing. So when you disassemble your gun, make sure it's upright. You know, more or less, right? Okay, and I'll show you. Yikes, the spring just fell out. But yeah, basically right in this little square notch, and that's where that tiny spring goes. And there's also an equally tiny ball bearing. So don't lose those. You'll need them. They keep the safety from flopping back and forth uselessly. The next part that you need to do, you want to take it apart, is there's 3 little screws here. You need a special sized Allen key. Okay, take that off, and I'll show you the next part. This is what the gun looks like. Now, when you take this apart, I recommend taking this spring out, but I left it in because I wanted to show you the relationship of all the components in here and how everything works. Okay, so when you're pulling the trigger, you're pushing this part of the Sear up on the pivot pin, and then the Sear can come down and it can release the hammer. Now right now I've oversprung the spring. This spring should, see, there should be some tension on that, so I've overdone it on the spring. If you, when you're doing your 2-second free spring lightening, if it doesn't fit just right, just pull it out a little bit. It's no big deal. And then you can put it back in and test it and see how it fits. But obviously you have to put the whole gun together. But this is a part that you can stretch back and forth a little bit, get it to the way you want. One of the first things I recommend doing is not changing the profile of this at all, but very, very carefully sanding it using a little guide to keep it perfectly straight and everything. And get it up to 600, and if you have a buffing wheel, polish it out. This part drags on the hammer. This is the part that stops the hammer. And when you lower that, the hammer flies past it. But then when you're cocking the gun, it has to drag across this. So you can ease this edge. You can even round that edge a little bit. It's not critical to do that. But if you take all the sharp corners off of it, that's the important thing, and make it so it's smooth to the touch. That's going to make it easier on your cocking effort. Now the part that contacts the trigger, you can see the little wear mark right there. Clearly, the smoother that is, and the shinier and the more polished that is, the nicer your trigger feel is going to be. And it's the same with this part right here. This is a pot metal piece, or steel, or whatever it is. It feels like pot metal to me. You can see it's painted. You can see where the chipping on the paint is right there. So that's the contact point. That's the only thing that ever is going to really make a difference. How this surface is the only part that's going to change your trigger feel significantly. The pins are a little bit loose, okay, so that's what gives the trigger that feeling of slop. If you had access to just slightly bigger hardened pins that were like this, you could try putting tighter pins in. You could try and bush everything up better. Instead of using a wavy washer to compress the trigger up against this removable part, you could maybe bush that out with a nylon bushing so that there's no wiggle on the trigger. So those are the little tune-up things that you can really do without buying anything. And I was just trying to show you the internals of it and the things that you could do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to polish this up. I'm going to polish this up. And then I'm going to check out how it feels and see if it feels smoother. Now just be careful if you're messing with this spring that you test the gun like I showed you, that so that you are not creating an unsafe condition where your gun may accidentally discharge if it's bumped. Don't want that. All you're trying to do is, what you really need to do if you're going to do this right is you find another spring that's like this that is just a tad lighter. You can even check the poundage on this spring by pushing it against the scale, in a measurable way. It's a very stiff spring. It's only meant to move this much. Okay, so if you really overcompress it, you can make it smaller, and of course you can stretch it back out. But be careful that you don't create any slop in the gun. You don't want any wiggly parts. When this is installed and it's pressing against the sear, you want the sear and the trigger and everything to be in firm contact. No wiggling. Be nice. Okay. So what we're trying to do here is just improve the trigger feel and just make it feel more solid and crisp. So let's see how that works. Okay, the way I'm dressing this is on some 600. Okay, you don't want to change the round of it at all. So what I'm doing is I'm rolling it off of there, just like that. I'm rolling it each time. Okay, and you can see that there's like a seam mark that's disappeared. So now that's perfectly flat and smooth right where it makes contact with the sear. I'm not worried about the rest of it. Now one thing you could do as a cosmetic is you could take all the paint off this and polish this on a buffing wheel. Get rid of the crummy looking little seam on the back of it and stuff. You can make the trigger look, more pro. But that's not going to improve the feel. It's just going to make it look cool. Okay. So you can see how that's not evenly stamped or whatever they do. They stamp these parts or whatever. They shear them out or something. And you can see that that's not flat. It's got a high and a low. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it perfectly flat and shiny on the 600. Okay, so now this area is now nice and smooth, flat. It could be run on the buffing wheel to make it really nice and shiny, right? Same with this. So the two contact points are in good shape. Previously, I took care of this whole thing. Okay, that's all about the way it drags against the hammer when you're cocking it. This part stops the hammer, but this part's just in the way of the hammer when you're cocking the breech. So make that nice and smooth and shiny. Okay, there's one other area of friction. Now it's a very, very, very small friction point. But right here, where it pivots, okay, you can see how rough that is. See how rough that is? And how it's almost like it's a little file. Okay, this thing is also not perfectly straight, which is really nothing you're going to be able to do about that. But if I were to make this area where it pivots right here very smooth, it'll be one less little bit of drag. Okay. And that's about as far as we're going to get with this. And the spring just presses up against this part, and I'm not going to worry about that. So now you can see what running it on a sanding block, corrosive 600 will do. Got it nice and polished up. Okay, so I could take this down to the buffing wheel, polish it up. Now, there's this little tiny, this only moves a tiny bit, right? It only moves this much. So you can take a look at the pivot point area. You can see if it looks like it needs anything. Frankly, I don't see any wear on this, so I don't think that that's an issue. Alright, so let's put it back together and see how it feels even before I polish it, see if it makes any difference. Okay, so this is how you need to test this. Okay, first of all, if you've dinkered with this spring at all and you've changed it. Now right now I've got this spring so that it fits between the sear and the frame, and there's no rattle, there's no wiggle. Okay, but it's just ready to go. Okay. You can hear a little bit of crinking, okay, which is the spring flexing backwards. The only way to change that is there's a very expensive assembly you can buy in here that has a little guide and a little spring and a little adjuster and everything, and you can fine tune that. But with the stock spring, it's just crusty. This is the crustiest part of the whole trigger right here, is this sound. Hear that? Ring, ring, ring. That's the spring moving against the bottom of the sear. But when you pull the trigger, now let's get the safety out of the way. When you pull the trigger, there is no more gritty feeling between the trigger and the sear. It just rolls back on it. There's no wiggle, there's no play in the trigger. Just lowers the sear like it's supposed to. It doesn't make any. Now that would be a great place for a drop of lube. And I would use grease, like axle grease, not oil. Just a little dab. But you can see this spring leaves much to be desired. It's a little strong for what this gun requires, and it's a source of the crustiness right there when that goes up and down. See it? Because it's just hitting the edge of the spring. It's kind of a hokey way to do things when you think about it. You got one edge of a spring touching one little edge of a piece of metal, and it's going to grind back and forth across it. It's going to make a little noise. So I'm going to attempt to improve that by polishing the bottom of this where it contacts the spring and see if it stops making that little creaky noise. That little noise. Let's see how it goes. But basically just trying to fine-tune the gun without spending any money at all. Polish parts, adjust spring pressures, inspect things, lubricate things, clean things. You see there's a lot to desire when it comes to, you see how much play is in there? I think I could fit some little plastic washers on either side of that and keep that from wiggling around. I could probably do the same for the trigger, keep it from wiggling around. So it's a little wiggly, it's not too bad. And little things like that. Make the gun feel more like a gun instead of a toy from Walmart, right? That's the area I want to address, right where the spring touches right there. So dress that up just a little bit so it doesn't go every. Okay, so to sum up, the low cost, no cost modifications. This is for a 2240, 1377, a lot of them. Okay, polish everything. It's probably the easiest way to put it. Just polish the trigger, polish the Sear, and I bushed out the Sear with one little thin plastic washer like this, just a plain little plastic washer just to make it less wiggly. Okay, and I went from something that went to making no noise at all. None whatsoever. No play in the trigger. Sear is nice and smooth. The feel between the trigger and the Sear before was kind of gritty. Now it's completely improved. So there you go. A no cost, low cost mod you can make to your Crosman pellet gun. I hope that was informative and entertaining for you guys. And remember, if you do tweak this spring, make sure that there's no play at all, and test it by slamming it around a bit. Make sure it's safe. Alright guys, enjoy. Have fun.